Welcome and thank you for coming out on this cold, cold night. My name is Rob Klein. I am the host of Oral Histories Live. With us tonight, the Iowa traveler himself, the great Cary Hahn. I need to thank Mike and Esther Wilson for their support of this program. If you would join me in thanking them.
I always said it would be a cold night when people would come out to see me.
Well, you deliver what you promise. I appreciate that. So this will work just like it usually does. We'll talk a little bit as though you're not even there, and then we'll take your questions. And well, I won't take your questions unless you are really, really bored. Cary will take your questions. And then we'll be done for the evening in about an hour all told. Let me start here. Cary is from my wife's hometown of St. Charles, Missouri. And lest you think that he is only famous here, when I was first dating my wife, we would go to visit her grandparents in St. Charles. And after we had weighed in on the state of the Cardinals and all of those things, without fail, her grandpa Roy would say, "Well, Rob, how's old Cary Hahn?" And the first time he did it, I looked at him and I said, "Who?" "Oh, Cary J. Hahn."
Yes.
Evidently in the hometown, they know you so well, you don't need the J.
That's correct.
There you go. So anyway, I thought I would share that little tidbit. He's famous everywhere he goes. Also, for the remainder of this conversation, he and I are going to discuss the fortunes of the Cardinals. Adam Wainwright was signed today.
Oh, he was?
He
I didn't
was,
hear that.
see?
Good for him. Good for us.
Yeah, I think so. 1-year contract, lots of incentives. It should be good.
Yeah. We should be so lucky.
I could use some incentives myself. It's certainly true. There are no performance incentives for Oral Histories Live. No matter how good I am, the pay is exactly the same.
Okay.
So, all right. So, St. Charles, Missouri, you come to, what brought you to the area?
This job, Channel 2, is what brought me here. Now, I do have a history before Cedar Rapids. Went to college for a couple of years in St. Charles, Lindenwood. I had a 2-year scholarship. It was ending. I was going to be drafted because I didn't have enough money to go for a third year without working. So instead of taking the draft, I joined the Navy for 4 years. I was lucky. I went to journalism, broadcast school, and then eventually wound up in Armed Forces Radio and Television. Served on the USS Hancock aircraft carrier off of Vietnam. My last duty station was in Kodiak, Alaska, running a radio and TV station for the Armed Forces. That was pre-satellite, so we were radio and TV and information for the guys and gals up there. Got out of the Navy, so I dabbled in radio and TV for 6 years, and then that's what I wanted to do. So I was home for all of a month, answered an ad and then Broadcasting Magazine took me to a disc jockey job at KFOR in Lincoln, Nebraska. So I was there about a year, eventually making it back to Missouri, went to Jefferson City, worked there. Fella I worked with in Jeff City went to Kansas City. He hired me. And then that station was sold the first time I was fired. That happens in broadcasting. So I needed a job, and I always said I needed a job in the worst way, and I wound up in Ottumwa. But the good news was it got me into television, KTVO, Channel 3. And I did all the usual news stuff, fires and murders, city council, school board.
Fires and murders in Ottumwa?
Yeah, yes.
Okay.
But I did more and more feature stories, and I went, I sure like doing that a lot better than, covering hard news. So I lobbied the news director, Alan Oldfield, at Channel 2 for 6 months. And finally got the gig here. And it only lasted for 25 years.
It's a pretty good return on your 6-month investment, really.
Right. So that's that.
And when you came to the station, Did you have the whole Iowa Traveler concept worked out?
It was there before I was. There were several travelers before me, but they were called the Two-Country Traveler. And it was a Magid consulting firm thing where they told TV stations that they consulted for, should I have a feature reporter? So back then, when it was still WMT television, Melissa Hubbard would always say, "You're in Two Country." So for a long time they were Two Country, and then when they were sold and the station split, they became KGAN. And I came along and I said, well, why don't we make it a little more, wide open? Let's make it the Iowa Traveler. So that's how that came about. But there was Gary Schendel was before me. He went to Minneapolis. There were at least 3 others before me.
Wow, I had no idea. Lost to the mists. of
Yeah,
history.
lost in the midst of time. Each one of those guys were around for a year or 2.
They just didn't have your stick-to-itiveness.
Well, they got promoted and went elsewhere.
That's
Got
what I
better
said, Cary.
gigs.
They didn't have your stick-to-itiveness.
And see, I'd already been traveling around for 17 years at other stations, and I liked Cedar Rapids and I liked Iowa, and I thought, why not? And it was a good gig for a long time.
Do you remember what the very first one was?
I do.
I thought you might.
In fact, I revisited it 20 years later. I don't remember the names, of course, but over by Wilson School, there was a lady who loved animals and rescued animals, and it was Be Kind to Animals Week. And the lady who used to run the animal shelter for many years, I'm sorry I've forgotten her name at the moment. I got those people together and we talked about animals, and it was a nice little story. That was number 1.
Wow, and then all told, how many do you think you did?
It's hard to say, but I've estimated about 5,000. Now this includes, they weren't all the feature stories. I did a lot of stuff that was just news, and this, that, and the other thing. So.
And how would you, previously we've had another broadcaster, from a lesser station. We had John Campbell, and he was fine. He did the best he could. But he told us a lot about how, the big old fish concept, of course, that just sort of literally leaps into his lap, right? But 5,000 or, even 4,000 feature stories. Right. Where are you finding all those stories?
Back then, Channel 2 subscribed to practically every little hometown newspaper across eastern Iowa. So I'd get the Dyersville, Bugle, and, all these places. And they'd all have stories just about people. And so I wasn't above stealing stories. And then once I established myself, I got phone calls, I got letters. I have boxes full still at home that my wife can attest to, of places people suggested that I go to. Many of them I did. And that's how, just keep the ears open. And the other thing is, my photographers and we would be somewhere just driving down the road and stumble across something, or go to the local cafe and say, hey, and they would always recognize me. And, well, you ought to talk to so-and-so, and that was another way. No shortage. The biggest problem with me as time passed over the years, Channel 2 became more corporate. It was, can you be back in an hour?
Well, and I'm interested in that because we're used to now, you see the remote on the street outside, and if you're in the know, you know that reporter is probably out there by herself. She set up her camera by herself. She's sort of running the whole thing. You had a team, and you had more time to put the piece together.
Exactly.
How frequently were you working on a really tight deadline?
often, even though they would let me, run up to Dubuque or Dyersville or Decorah. Oftentimes that story still had to be on the air at 6 o'clock at night.
Sure.
So we'd leave early in the morning, take the 2 hours to get there, come back. I'd be writing on the way back to the station, and then go in there. And every story that I did, I edited myself, physically edited. And this was before digital, this was videotape. So I sat in there and I was a master at cutting on deadline. And so yeah, and then the concept when I began in 1983 was, my news director said, 3 really good stories a week, 4 if you can. And so that's how we started. And I wouldn't necessarily have to be back that same night. I might have a day in advance, whenever we shot Monday, put together Tuesday or something like that. But again, as we got closer to the modern era, the time just dwindled. That also included story length. Back in the early days, I'd have maybe 2.5 minutes to tell a story. By the time I left, they were in love with 1:10. Ooh, I don't know what they do today, under a minute.
1:10. Wow. And so I got to think, once you start thinking like the corporation, once you start shrinking the segments, it gets harder to justify sending you so far afield, right?
Right. And you had all these nice little things, and the photographer would get these little shots, and they land on the, as they used to say, the cutting room floor. And that was a little discouraging. And then again, toward the latter years, around 2000, we had a news director who basically said, go back to what you used to do. That stuff was really good. So I got kind of a reprieve and got back to that style for a while.
And then they sold the station again, is that?
Well, Sinclair Broadcasting has now owned it, I think, for about 20 years.
Yeah, that's probably right.
1998 or 99 or something. And they left us alone for a long time. We were a cash cow, the way I was told. And they shoveled all the money out east, which they owned the place. And then after 3-4 years, then they started trimming budgets. And we were driving rusty trucks around, and it was at times discouraging.
That's very diplomatically said. So when you parted ways, whose idea was that?
I was told basically it came from Baltimore, where they're headquartered, and they actually gave me a week's notice so I could do a last story and say goodbye. I wasn't really allowed to say why I was saying goodbye. Everybody just assumed I was retiring. And no, it was one of these days I was walking down the hall. It was like, Cary, could we see you? As they ushered you into the boardroom. Basically said, we're not going to do the Traveler anymore. Thanks.
Yes. Can we see you?
Yeah.
It's never.
No, not.
That's never the lead into something good.
Right. So that was that.
All right. Well, you obviously were not retiring, or if you were retiring, you did a terrible job of retiring. But before we go on to those other things that you have done since then, we should probably do the hit parade. When you think back on all those stories, what are the ones that really stand out for you?
There really are stories that people had remembered for a long time. One of my favorites, and it's the first one we got dialed up here, we may show it later, was I went to the Waterloo Air Show in my second year here in 1984. And the Blue Angels of the Navy had their jet planes, and they offered me a ride. And I went, no, I'm not going to do that. And my friend Roger Riley, another reporter, he said, well, I'll do it. Like, okay, have at it. So he went up in the jet plane and did all of that. Then this other fellow had a 1944 Stearman biplane, plane they taught pilots how to fly in World War II. And it was an old prop plane, you know, like Snoopy flew. And they said, well, you could ride with us. And they had a wing walker act. So there was another feature reporter at Channel 7 by the name of Gary Sarnoff. He was tall, had red hair. He was very clever. And he said, well, I'm too tall. You know, I can't get in that getup. Tall, I've never had a problem with. And so since he turned it down, I went, I'll do it. So they strapped me into this harness. I was tied in 3 different ways and got on this biplane, and they took me up and we flew around. And that was one of the most exciting things I've ever done.
I'm pretty sure my son, the aspiring aerospace engineer, would have told you to choose the Blue Angels.
Yes. Stay in the plane.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, I have trouble with, you know, stomach, and I don't ride roller coasters, much less a fighter jet. So that's one on the list. The second one came a short time later.
You should tell them about
Yeah, that comes the rest of the story.
the rest of the story with the airplane.
Oh, okay. I was going to tell that after we saw the video, but I don't know how we're doing this. But okay, the rest of the story is Roger Riley and my photographer were both there. And that was back in the day when we had the camera and a cable that went into a tape deck. Now it's all built in together in digital. And so you stuck a tape in the tape deck. So of course they stayed on the ground and shot me taking off and being up in the air. And when I landed, that's like the biggest rush, you know, I've ever had. And I was like, boy, I'm glad that's over. It was exciting, but you know, once is enough. So we are coming in after our landing, and they run up to me and say, Cary, we didn't get it. And I'm like, yeah, no, we're serious. We were so enthralled in seeing you up there, the tape ran out, and we didn't know it. So I'm, you know, standing up above the pilot, and he's hearing this, and I'm like, can we do it again? He says, yeah, we can. Well, storm clouds were rolling in, and the second trip up was much bouncier, and I'm like, Lord, let's get this over with. And that was the rest of the story. What you see on tape was the second time I went up. And now you know.
Wow.
My other top hit, the hog-calling nun of Dubuque. And there was this nice lady nun. I guess most of them are, aren't they?
There is some debate about that, I suppose.
She went to the Waterloo Cattle Congress on Senior Citizens Day, and they had a hog calling competition, and she won. And that showed up on the Associated Press wire. So that'd be fun, you know. So I arranged for her to go out to a real hog farm and call real pigs, which she hadn't done in like a half century. And my photographer that day just did a marvelous job. He really makes the story. He got in with those hogs. And she was a trooper. And I stayed in touch with her for many, many years. And she just died, maybe 5 years ago, like at 102.
Wow.
Sister Bertha Marie Closer. And that was terrific.
Hog calling keeps you young, I guess.
Could be. Yeah, she was a pistol, that's for sure. And the third story, which I don't have with me tonight, was I-380 bowling. Remember we had a flood in 1993?
It's hard to remember that one.
Yeah, that one.
But at the time, it was a big deal.
Yeah, that's right. And so 93, yeah. So they closed I-380 from Cedar Rapids to 80 because of those bridges down there by the reservoir. They wanted to check them out. And they didn't want, supports to go out and all that sort of thing. So my photographer, Gary Edwards, called me one evening and he said, Cary, I have one of the greatest ideas for a story, or the stupidest.
Don't oversell it.
And I said, great and stupid? That sounds, what is it? So he said, well, there's, like 3 miles of I-380 that's not being used. What could we do with it? So we spent a half a day getting stuff, including a bowling ball, and we came up with all these ideas that we could camp, pitch tent. We stretched a volleyball net across the highway. We had a cookout. It's been a while since I've seen the story. And then we would keep intercutting because I started it rolling the bowling ball, and then we'd cut through the story. You'd see this ball rolling. And then, of course, at the end, I'd go, it's a strike. And I swear for 20 years, people remembered that story. And it was just a fun one.
I happen to know that Lindenwood College has a very successful collegiate bowling program. Is that where you got your skills? No?
No. I did bowl in my youth.
Okay, fair enough.
In St. Charles, however.
And how does one get permission to go up on the bridges?
I did. I called the state DOT. They have an office somewhere around here. It's been so long ago, but I called them, and they, thankfully, he knew who I was by watching me on TV. Yeah, you shouldn't have any problem with that. So we just, pulled the barrier out and drove in, put the barrier back. Nobody was out there, so we weren't bothering anybody.
The guy from the DOT said,
Yeah.
yeah, you shouldn't have any problem with that?
Yeah, he was a nice fella. I think we also maybe called the patrol too, just to be on the safe side.
It seems like maybe you would want to do that, yes. So I was trying to remember, since I have a particular interest in this, did you do Iowa Traveler Stories from Hancher Auditorium?
Many.
I thought so.
Yeah, Wally Chappell was the director back then, and was there a special year or something they were celebrating?
Well, that is a thing we do.
Yeah, I
but
know.
my guess is you're thinking about the millennial year, probably.
Well, actually, it might have been.
Or it could have been
leading
the 20, if there's a 0
Yeah,
or a 5,
that's right.
we at Hancher will throw you a party of some kind.
Right. I did many a story, met so many artists. My best story out of that was the Chieftains, and Wally said, hey, the Chieftains will do a segment with you, so okay. So they had a little rehearsal, and it's Patty Maloney, who's the head of the group, and he told my photographer, he says, whatever you want us to do, we'll do it. We'll start, we'll stop, change camera positions. And so they played the same song 3 times, so we got the wide shot, and then my photographer, got little cutaways and things. He was a great interview. And he was the champion of PR. He knew how to do it and what it was all about.
Speaking of champions of PR, the Chieftains return to Hancher Auditorium this coming March. Tickets are on sale now.
You can ask Patty if he remembers me.
I will. I'll also slip you your commission on the tickets I just sold. I'm very grateful. All right, so your time at the Iowa Traveler wraps up.
Yeah,
and
2008.
And what's the next stop?
KMRY Radio, Cedar Rapids.
You went directly there?
Oh, well, my wife is reminding me I worked 5 years for the Marion Times. No.
Flood.
Oh, the flood. Yes.
She's
Dennis
really helpful
Green.
over there.
Boy, she's right. Dennis Green, who is here with me, invited me to do late afternoon newscasts on flood coverage and information. And so, yeah, that was the first thing I did. And then the Marion Times had me as a columnist for about 5 years. But the saving grace was Rick Sellers, who owns and operates KMRY, always said, if Channel 2 ever gives you the boot, you got a job with me. But there was a short waiting time because my predecessor announced he was retiring on his 65th birthday, and that was Rick Sampson.
Mm.
And so I had about 8 or 9 months to wait. So he retired. I interned with him for like a week. And now I'm in my 11th year at KMRY, my semi-retirement gig. And I'm still out at KCCK because before the news thing in 2003, started being there on Sunday afternoons, Big Band Memories, 1 to 3, and then Murray Kent comes after me, 3 to 5, and we have all this great vintage music.
There you go. So I'm interested in KMRY, which is the, well, other than KCCK, of course, the station of choice in certain Klein vehicles. And, well, basically, since Ricky has arrived at the station, any of you listen to KMRY, the morning show is now like a morning zoo show, right?
It's kind of turned into that.
Yes, and you are you bring the gravitas.
I'm the leveling voice.
Yes, and how do you manage that on a day-to-day?
It's difficult.
I know you have your own room. You don't have to be in the same room, right?
I'm on the other side of the glass. Yeah.
All right.
Ricky is from the South, and he massages that every morning. And he likes to play the difficult, burdened soul, I guess.
Well, and Eric often feels burdened himself.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so
And Eric gives him jibes and things. And my best part of the morning is at 6:30 after our little newscast. Then Eric gives random facts.
yes, 5 random facts.
Which
yes.
is totally unrehearsed, and that's when I get to say silly things. And I have fun. So I'm only there in the morning till about 9 o'clock. The worst part of the job is 4 a.m. when I get up and people ask, are you ever, in fact, maybe I should just let you ask the question, are you ever going to retire? Do you ever think about
Hey,
retiring?
Cary, have you ever thought of maybe actually retiring?
Every morning at 4 o'clock. 4 o'clock, man. Yeah, but I wake myself up and then I roll in.
Mm-hmm. And so what does your morning look like when you get there?
It's totally opposite of being the traveler. I don't go anywhere. Now, when I first started working at KMRY, I was still full-time. I would still go cover events and news conferences and that sort of thing. But I was going to retire at 65, and they said, just come in the morning, read the headlines. Okay, I'll give that a shot. That's been 5, 6, 7 years now, I guess. So I'm really not much of a newsman anymore. I'm sort of a news reader, but I rewrite and make phone calls and get email news releases.
Well, and you know how to pronounce all the words.
Most of them, yes, and towns in Iowa, I'm very familiar with.
There you go. So let me jump back to the Marion Times for a minute. When you were writing for the Marion Times, were you basically doing feature work there too?
Yes.
Sort of the traveler in print?
That's exactly what it was.
And so you kept chasing around?
Yeah, mostly obviously in Marion.
Right.
And that's why I finally gave it up after 5 years. Was I was still working full time for KMRY, and then once a week I'd go out to Marion, interview somebody, and then take another couple of hours or so to write the story. It was a weekly deadline. And finally my wife said, something's got to give.
And it was the Marion Times.
Yeah, it was the Marion Times.
That had to give. Fair enough. Tell me more about Big Band Memories and what makes that music important to you and why you keep.
Okay.
Because Dennis is a handful.
Yeah.
And so.
Well, I work Sundays, so I don't see
Right,
him
so
much.
he's not there. All right. It's like Jason tonight. Dennis isn't there. You can do whatever you want. Play that big band music.
He invited me and Murray in 2003 to do the afternoon show. And, you know, I've always been a fan, since being here, of Eddie Picard. And when I was a kid, I found my dad's old Glenn Miller, Tommy Dorsey records. And so before the Beatles even hit, when I was 11 or 12, I started listening to big band and jazz music, and I liked that. Well, then when I was in high school, the Beatles, that era, I liked that. Then when I was in Armed Forces Radio in the Navy, we played everything. So I did the morning disc jockey show at 2 different places on ship and up in Alaska. That would be pretty much, you know, rock and roll. But we'd have other segments where I would do big band music as well. And I collect it, I've got it. And then the worst thing that ever happened to me was when they invented CDs and they reissued all of this great stuff that sounds great and things that had never been released before. So that's what I share with our audience. I'm mostly the big band era of the late 30s and into the 40s. But I'll play Sinatra from any era, and even modern day if folks are singing the standards. Murray Kent, he really likes the early 30s and even into the 20s. So you're likely to hear a little bit of anything.
There you go. All right. I can tell that you are dying to ask questions. What questions do you have? Dennis Green has a question. We've offended Dennis Green, and now all the gloves are off.
Before you get off the big band thing, Cary,
Yes.
talk about what you did with the Glenn Miller Festival in Shenandoah.
Oh, totally forgot about that. I started going to the Glenn Miller Festival in Clarinda, which is near Shenandoah, in 1986, just as a fan. Yeah, Glenn Miller was born in Clarinda, Iowa in 1904. And they created the Glenn Miller Birthplace Society in 1976 as a bicentennial project. Once, when I was at a WMT Glenn Miller concert out at Agon, Governor Ray said to me, "Hey, you know how that thing got started in Clarinda?" And I said, "No." He said, "Well, a bunch of those folks were up in my office in Des Moines, and they were talking about the bicentennial, and was wondering out loud, you know, what they could do in their little town." And he said, "Well, you know, you got a famous person that was born there." I guess maybe the person who he was talking to didn't know. And I said, "Yeah, Glenn Miller was born there." Lights popped on. And so in '76, they did it as a one-time only bicentennial thing. Proved very popular. Well, it didn't take me, I mean, it took me 10 years to finally get there in '86. I fell in love with the town, the people, the music. And then in 1990, I started performing for them. Performing meaning being an announcer. And we do a little recreation of a Glenn Miller radio show. And I don't know, 10 or so years ago, their longtime MC retired, and so they invited me to be the MC. So I've done that now for a decade or so. That's every June, second weekend in June. They have bands from around the world come and perform there, and it's really a fun thing. It's a clean little town, and so many friendly people that volunteer and put this event together, and it's been a big part of my life, actually.
Yeah, absolutely. So does the Glenn Miller Orchestra come yearly?
Yeah, they come every year.
Wow.
And here lately, they've been doing like a Friday evening formal concert, and then they do a big band dance Saturday night to close out the event.
Oh, that's really cool. Well, and speaking, I should have asked you about this. Speaking of things that you lead, you often lead the Community Veterans Day celebration. I'll bet you did that yesterday.
I did do that yesterday, and there was about as many people there as there are here. Maybe there was a few more, but yeah, the weather kind of hit us yesterday, and the New Horizons band that always provides so much, they were no-shows, and we were going to have a Kirkwood choir, chamber choir. They canceled. We were supposed to have some school kids there. They didn't make it. So hopefully we'll get all those things back by Memorial Day.
So what did you do? Did you tap dance?
Yeah,
What-
no, we did the usual stuff. We had a speaker, honored the Veteran of the Year, our man, the taps player, Dr. Denny Kroll. He and the police department bagpipes man, they both volunteered to play the service song medley. And the guy from the police department said, I think it'll sound mostly like the songs.
Well, that's what you want to hear.
Yeah.
That's the standard we use at Hancher. It sounds mostly like the songs.
And then Denny said, I got the sheet music for all of them. So he did. And the crowd was very appreciative. We had a one-man band who played the service medley of the Armed Forces songs. So yeah, we had enough to have a program.
There you go. Other questions?
Yes.
Can you tell us about your Bourbon Street pilgrimage each year?
Yeah, sure. Now, people ask me, do I still travel? Well, my wife and I do. And in the year 2000, we first visited New Orleans on a Channel 2 travel trip. I used to host many of those holiday travel tours. And so we went on this one right before we were married. And it was like travels to the Old South or something. And so we were like 2 days and 1 night, or 2 nights and 2 days, whatever, in New Orleans. Well, I had been there back in the 70s for a real quick visit. She'd been there as a kid. So it had been years since we were there. We really enjoyed it, and I said, we really need to go back, for a longer time period. So a couple of years passed, and I was at a Jerry Lewis Telethon meeting in Las Vegas, and they were having their local gala, and they offered a silent auction for a package in New Orleans. And so I bought it, or actually I wrote my name for the bid, and then I had buyer's remorse. I was like, when are we gonna have time to go to New Orleans? And she said, I get spring break. She was a school teacher at McKinley School. So we went down there on her spring break time, and we've pretty much gone every year since. And one of the first years we went there, I said, I want to see Pete Fountain. Was that on the first trip? That we were at the bus people, right? So the bus people were going to go to dinner or somewhere. And I told our tour guide, I said, I've always wanted to see Pete Fountain. So we're going to go to his club. And so we did, and had a grand time. So we got to see Pete about a half dozen times before he passed. And a great jazz man and clarinet player. And one of the last times we saw him, he left his various clubs in New Orleans and went over to a casino in Bay St. Louis, Mississippi, and it got hit by Hurricane Katrina. So they put that back together, and so one of the last times we saw him, I went down early to sit outside of the room where he played, and he just shows up on his own, and he says, are you here to see me? And I said, yes. He said, all right. He said, I'll be right back with you. And he went in. He says, you've got front row center. So I have a little place card that Pete put our names on and put it right on the table. And that was one grand night. And we've seen so many performers, and Bourbon Street, ain't what it used to be. Al Hurd isn't there anymore, Pete isn't. But squirreled away at other places, there are performers that you would enjoy. And KCCK has offered several trips down there with Lisa Baum. So if they do that again, check it out. Or just go on your own sometime. But don't just hang out on Bourbon Street.
Other questions?
Yes?
Cary, you're the face of the Mustard District Telethon for years. Tell us about that relationship.
Okay, yeah, that's Charlie, of course, from Camp Courageous. And yeah, I did the telethon for 30 years because I did it down in Ottumwa before I came up here. And Channel 2 had designated the Traveler as a co-host, so I got it that way, although I said, hey, I've done it before. So yeah, that's one of the most meaningful things I got to do over the years at Channel 2, do the Muscular Dystrophy Telethon. For many, many years, I'd go up to Camp Courageous during Campers Week for those kids. And very gratifying. And can't tell you how many times I met Jerry Lewis. And I always tell people, no matter what you think of Jerry Lewis, some people love him, some people not so. But I said he was a genuinely philanthropic guy who put his mouth where his money, the other way around, money where his mouth was. Raised about $1 billion.
Wow.
Not too many people can say that. And so I did my little part. For the first 10 years, I did it with Barry Norris. You all remember Barry Norris? And we just had a barrel of laughs on and off air. And to this day, people come up to me and say, "Hi, Barry, how are you?" And I go, "No, I have the hair, at least still some. Barry didn't. We had about the same shape, but we were two different people." The other day, I had somebody come up to me and say, "Hi, Denny." So we're always confused. People know we're somebody.
Well, and there are people still think you're on TV, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
some people still, I think I'm still doing that.
They're apparently watching a different station, but
Yeah, exactly.
they're pretty sure that you are on. There was another question.
I would like to have you tell us how you met your wife. I remember hearing that a long time ago, maybe on the radio.
Oh,
I think it's an interesting.
yeah, I have mentioned it on the radio.
If you get it wrong, she will correct you. I'll even give her the microphone.
I have her mother to thank. She always said her mother was born with roller skates, and she loved to travel. And when Jean and her sister were little kids, they'd hop literally in the car and drive coast to coast and went everywhere. So in her elder years, she liked to go on these motor coach trips. So Jean had been living in, what was the name of that town? St. Charles, Missouri.
I've heard of that place.
She was a school teacher down there, and she had come back here because her mother had been ill, her sister passed, so she moved back up here. So her mother wanted to go on this train trip to Canada in 1999. So on June 20th, 1999, that trip was leaving from the old Happy Chef, which is now Scott's Family Restaurant on Blair's Ferry. And she always tells people, we met in a parking lot at 5 in the morning, which is true. Her mom was in a wheelchair and she was being her attendant. My dad went with me, and I just assumed, she was an attendant for this lady. Found out a little later that she wasn't. She was, but she was her daughter. And we were the youngest people on that motor coach trip. And we went to Seattle and Vancouver and Victoria Island and across Canada on Via Rail. And by the time the train trip was over, it was like the Love Boat.
Wow. Cary J. Hahn with the moves. I am impressed. Well done. All right. Question here?
And we've lived almost happily ever since.
You have to go home at some point.
Did you ever head out for a story and
Yeah, I remember the time I lost Makokada. We wound up in the other M town, not all far from here. No, Manchester might have been Manchester. Yeah, we went to the wrong town. And I said it says right here, oh, we're in the wrong town. So we had to find something else to do and eventually got to the other place. I was at the state fair one year doing state fair stuff, and they called me, Cary, there's been a murder at the state fairgrounds. See what you can find out about it. Remember a couple they were vendors, and they were found dead in their trailer. A son-in-law or somebody stole money. So I had to change hats, that day. What was really fun was about 2004 or 3, we had no anchor people at Channel 2. They essentially all left. One went to a different job, Dave Benton, I think, went to Illinois, and Amy Johnson left the biz, and I don't know, the weekend person was gone. So I got to interview, George Bush, who was running for president. And they always know I've always been interested in politics. And so oftentimes I've been at the right place at the right time, and things have kind of fallen in my lap. My best celebrity, Gregory Peck. He was at Hancher.
Our place, right.
Conversation with Gregory Peck. And I called Wally Chappell and I said, boy, if there's any way I can meet Gregory Peck, that'd really be cool. So I said, well, they're having an after-event party at the sponsor's house. Would you like to come to that?
That is our move. After party at the sponsor's house.
That's right. And so I did. Well, there was all sorts of people. The place was packed, especially out front, because they all wanted to be there when he got out of the limo and all that. So I went, well, I'll see him eventually. So I just came on inside. And I was standing around this corner. So he arrived and was saying hi to everybody. Comes around the corner and we're like face to face. And he's like 6 foot something. He says, hi, I'm Greg Peck. And I went, yeah, I know. So I've had fun things like that.
Now, you were telling me when we talked last week that not only the anchor desk, you sat at the sports desk.
Yeah.
You did the
The
weather.
For a long time, I was the bench guy. I would do weekend news. One time, Barry Norris couldn't do the noon weather, and nobody else was around. So they literally, I see these guys, at least you used to, they had a little clicker to change the weather graphics. They gave me about a 5-minute run through, do this and do that, like, And then it turned out, and Dennis might appreciate this, it was the day they changed our entire graphics package. So the least of their worries was me. They wanted to make sure they had the right opening, the new music, all this sort of stuff. And so they got to me doing the weather, and it's like no one was even listening to me. And I came off the set and I said, I'm never doing that again. It's really uncomfortable. And then they said, can you do it tomorrow? I said, if I can have a rehearsal. So I wound up doing it the rest of the week. Yes, I did sports desk on vacations. You talk about one-man bands today. They have these nice small cameras. Well, back in Ottumwa, I often was the one-man band, and we had these huge blue cameras, the RCA, whatever they called them back then. I used to know the number. First edition live video cams or tape cams. and you had the battery belt, and you had the tape deck, and that's why I'm as short as I am today.
You were much taller at the beginning of your career.
Yeah, and so when I came to Channel 2, it was like dying and going to heaven having a photographer. Yeah. I do have people email me or meet me and say, well, if they meet me, hey, remember me? And I'm like, gotta give me a hint. Or now I meet grandchildren. You know, you came to my grandpa's house one day. Do you still have that tape? Sometimes I do,
Yeah.
but my whole collection is up at Wartburg College at Waverly, and they've begun a dozen or more years ago, the Archives of Iowa Broadcasting. They recently got a grant, a large grant, that they're transferring a lot of stuff to digital. So I check on their site every now and then, and I think they're doing mine. And my fear always that those old tapes would just, you know, wind up in the landfill. And so I hope that doesn't happen.
Well, those digital projects are great when colleges digitize that old material, and then it's often available. Will people be able to watch it online and things
I
like
hope.
that? Yeah.
I know that's what their original intent
Oh,
was.
that's awesome. That's really great. All right, any other questions? We like to close with this question. If you were to meet the younger, taller, still in Missouri, old Cary Hahn, what advice would you have for him?
Get out! Get a different career.
Don't get on that wing.
Yeah, that's right. Nothing too earth-shaking. I enjoyed it all. A few years ago, I won an award, and I said I won this against all odds. Because so often it seems like, you know, you're fighting, like any other job, fighting management, ownership, the new news director, time restraints, all that sort of thing. But I stuck to it, and we got her done. And that's the great thing. My little job I have now at Channel 2, KMRY. Been there 11 years, have not had an argument with anybody about anything. I love Rick Sellers, I love Eric, love Ricky, Susan, everybody who works there. It's been a pleasant transition. And then to my younger self, I'd say, wait till you meet Jean. She was the answer to a question, and I told her that for many, many years. People would ask me, why are you still in Cedar Rapids? And of course, to meet her.
Wow.
I saw another hand.
I was curious, what's your most favorite little town in Iowa you visited? You have one.
Wow. Favorite little town? There's a bunch of them. I mentioned Clarinda in eastern Iowa. We go to Marquette and the other little town, McGregor.
Yeah.
We like going up there. West Branch, I've had a lot of fun in since I'm a history nut. I can't tell you how many times I've been to the Hoover Library. They've always got something, you know, going on down there. I always make fun of Shoeyville on the air just because it's a funny name. And I don't know who Mr. Shuey might have been, but
Do you hear
beautiful
from
downtown Shoeyville, and no one's ever called me.
No, the Chamber of Commerce
No.
in Shoeyville doesn't?
No, it's never complained, and you know. At Monticello and Camp Courageous. Yeah, and you also must remember that when I started, I-380 did not go to Waterloo. So we went through LaPorte and all those little towns. The highway to Dubuque wasn't finished. That's not all that long ago. And we stopped in all those little towns. And literally, Jean and I will be somewhere, man, I used to come here all the time. And Now it's been quite some time. And I always marvel at the people who always lived here all their life, had never been to a lot or many of these places. And so I've said, get out. And then I've had other people say over the years, if you hadn't done that story, we wouldn't have visited, and we did, and we liked it. They used to like the eating places that I used to showcase. And so I've sold. Yeah, the Gunder Burger, that's exactly right. Yeah, I helped put that on the map a little bit. And used to love this place at McGregor called White Sands. Unfortunately, it's long out of business. But the food was great, and the characters that hung out there were fun. And that's really what I miss, is how Iowa has changed in the 35 years that I've been here. The small towns aren't what they used to be for obvious reasons. And so the little cafes aren't there. And some of the things I used to visit and do. But then, of course, there's other places and other things. Time marches on, as this whole building shows us.
All right. Well, I think we will put a pin in it right there. If you would join me in thanking the Iowa Traveler, Cary Hahn.
Are we going to show one story?
I think we are going to run at least a story.
Okay, Jay Leno, thanks for talking about us. I'm Cary J. Hahn, the Iowa Traveler, man lion in Iowa City.
I'm only 35 years younger.
This is a big stick. The luxurious will be some 40,000 before it's all over with. And Dave and Maggie, the headline says it all. The city goes forth.
Oh.
20 years as the Iowa Traveler. I didn't realize it would turn out to be a career. I've lost exact count, but I've done somewhere between, would you believe, 3,000 and 4,000 stories. So it's always hard to pick my favorite or the best. This weekend in Amana, it's the Isaac Fest, where you'll find some heavy metal and some roasting around too. But there are some I really like and had fun doing. So sit back and enjoy some of the best of the Iowa Traveler with yours truly. Oh, I look a little different. 20 years does things to you, This is CBS News at 6 with Tiffany O'Donnell, Dave Bennett, meteorologist Ryan Burchett, and sports with Andy Garner. Meet Earl Cary of Lafayette, Louisiana. He's a Vietnam-era combat veteran, and she's a former desk clerk turned wing rider.
It looked like fun, it really did, and he didn't have to talk me into it, I wanted to do it.
Mike is a World War II trainer, a 1943 steerman. Earl says this is something he's always wanted to do.
We feel that the Wing Riding Act and the wing walking deal is kind of preserving a form of aviation out of the past, the barnstorming days and that sort of stuff.
I knew ahead of time I had a chance to go up. I reluctantly accepted the challenge. Me, a guy who doesn't like amusement park rides.
Probably the best thing for you to do is relax. I know it's going to be like, but
Real hard.
if you tense up, it's going to make you hurt even more, make you sore. You'll have 100-mile-an-hour wind blowing in your face, so that might be a little bit strange.
Thank you. I hope I get to talk to you again. I'm not going anywhere. It's easy for you to say. This baby as close as I get to fly like a bird. Chalk up my levity to being real nervous. And there was a real traffic jam waiting for a Blue Angel landing and an Ozark takeoff. Then It was time. Earl asked me if I still wanted to do it. It was thumbs up, eyes closed, fingers crossed, and heart pumping. It was super, man. This is Mount St. Francis Convent in Dubuque, the home of 69-year-old Sister Bertha Marie Closer, who's been a nun for more than 10 years.
I'm now older than she
Before she
is.
was always a nun. As a young girl, she did chores on her dad's north wing of Vista Iowa farm.
It was evening when it was time to call the hogs. I mean, in the period my father and my father loaded the corn and called the pigs home.
Well, this fall, she went to Waterloo's Cattle Congress for the first time and unexpectedly walked away with the title of Hog Calling Champion.
I was very pleased to get 2 tickets for the Louise Mandel show.
Since winning, she's made all the papers and even did a Chicago radio talk show. But for the old Iowa traveler, she was gracious enough to travel to the Brown Brothers hog farm north of Dubuque to try her stuff on real live hogs.
Well, there's a bunch of them waiting for us. So you haven't done this with real pigs for 50 years?
It's been more than 50 years since I really called the hogs in that farm at North End of Vista, Iowa.
Okay, well, there they are. Have at it.
I think it worked.
Sister Bertha Marie Closer, the hog-calling nun of Dubuque.
I just can't get over to think that such an insignificant thing would mean so much to so many people.
I'm Cary Hahn.